The Arizona Cardinals' biggest roster needs ranked.
You are Locked On Cardinals, your daily Arizona Cardinals podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Cardinals, Alex Clancy here. Follow me on Twitter at Clancy's Corner. Follow the podcast at Locked On AZ Cards. Thank you for making Locked On Cardinals your first listen each and every day, free wherever you get your podcast and on YouTube. Go to the YouTube channel, search Locked On Arizona Cardinals, hit the subscribe button, turn notifications on, leave a like for the video, leave a comment. While the Cardinals are sitting at 2-9, there is no shortage of things to talk about. And I'm starting to get more DMs on Twitter. Please send me a DM on Twitter at Clancy's Corner. Don't need to follow. And that's not why I'm doing this. I'd love to talk about topics that you'd like to discuss. I've got plenty, but I always want to hear from you and, be able to make this more your show every day. This episode of Locked On Cardinals is brought to you by the Game Time app. Download the Game Time app, create an account, use code LOCKEDONNFL for $20 off your first purchase. Last minute tickets, lowest price guaranteed. So I was trying to decide what to do on today's show. And I was like, well, I could really just unlock this conversation, this ongoing conversation I've been having on Twitter about the Cardinals more than likely needing to draft elsewhere. Even if they do have the opportunity to draft Marvin Harrison Jr. If this is the first time you're hearing me say that, let me explain. I'm going to take the entire show and I'm going to talk about why I'm right. No, I'm kidding. I'm going to take the entire show and I'm going to rank the biggest needs, in my opinion, that the Arizona Cardinals have on their roster as they pivot towards the latter part of 2023 and then really pivoting into 2024, hopefully back into relevancy as to what their biggest needs are. And I will kind of bury the lead here. While wide receiver is very important, they need more talent in the wide receiver room, especially if they decide not to retain Hollywood Brown. It's not the biggest need, and it's not the need that teams go after when they really have aspirations of building the deepest and most sustainable roster. So I'll discuss it. I'm going to give you a stat. And sure, I was looking this up because I honestly didn't know. I honestly did not know. So I was like, well, you know what? I'm going to look it up, and either it's going to strengthen my point or it's going to weaken it. There have been 24 wide receivers drafted in the top 10 since 2003. One of them has won a Super Bowl. 24 wide receivers drafted in the top 10 since 2003. One of them, Mike Evans, has won a Super Bowl and needed Tom Brady on the tail end of his career to do it. Now, that's not necessarily saying that Marvin Harrison Jr. wouldn't be great. That's not saying that Marvin Harrison Jr. isn't the right choice. This is a fluid conversation. But I wasn't expecting to get as much engagement as I did by something that I thought was kind of rational and obvious. But we're going to break this down. The 5 biggest needs that the Arizona Cardinals have on their roster, ranked. Okay, so 5th, let's just pull the Band-Aid off. Wide receiver. And I'll explain. This is a podcast you're going to want to listen to all of, so I can really tell the whole story here. Yes. And before I get into this, the Arizona Cardinals roster is not great. Nothing's changed since the start of the season. So while there's maybe people are tired of talking about the same things, that's when I really dig in, because it's like, listen, this is the issue that Cardinals have been dealing with. This is reaping what Steve Keim sowed. This is one of my favorite analogies to use, the real culmination of, the friend who would come over when you were younger, play with all your toys and never help you clean up and just leave. That's what Steve Keim did to the Arizona Cardinals organization. And now it's Monti Ossenfort and Jonathan Gannon's job to pick up the pieces. So this is going to be clunky. There's going to be a lot of needs. There's not going to be a lot of talent in places that need talent for the Cardinals to be relevant. And this is kind of bringing it to light where you look at the wide receiver room, yeah, the Cardinals need help. And it's not even close to the greatest position of need in regard to infusing talent through free agency in the draft. And yes, while we go into this, I understand that free agency is a thing. And I understand that there are going to be free agents that are going to want to get paid at positions of need for the Cardinals who play at, fringe or, true elite level. I understand all of that. And the Cardinals have a whole bunch of cheese to spend this offseason. I understand all of that. So while free agency is first, it will shed some light on the plan that Monti Ossenfort has going into the 2024 draft, of which I trust implicitly from what we've seen so far. And what his plan was going into the 2023 draft was they need everything. Not going to sign anybody in the offseason aside from Kyzir White, who is headed to IR with a torn bicep. By far the best offseason acquisition by the Cardinals, and I think that's pretty obvious. And when I talk about going into this season, where the Cardinals needed to find who their stars were, that's one of the biggest, tasks on their legal pad going into 2023 season. Kyzir White should be a Cardinal for a long time. He signed a very team-friendly deal going into this year. And imagine talent around him to really be able to allow him to elevate even more moving forward. Speedy recovery. Hopefully he'll be back ready and ready to go for week 1, as he very well should be for next year. Probably before that, obviously. But the fifth biggest need the Arizona Cardinals have is still wide receiver, because we're grading on a hell of a Steve Keim curve here. And I'm grouping in, just because it's Drew Petzing's offense, and I don't think this is cheating. I think his target share speaks volumes. Trey McBride, I'm grouping into the pass catcher group, into the wide receiver group, because Drew Petzing's offense leans heavily on the tight end position. And we'll see if Zach Ertz even comes back this year. I don't know if it would necessarily be necessary, especially with the trajectory that they're heading to at the end of the season. And we'll see where he is next year. But by all accounts, Trey McBride is TE1 moving forward, and you group him in with this talent group in the wide receiver room. Now, Greg Dortch, 6 for 76 on this past Sunday. Whenever he's got an opportunity, he's performed. Rondale Moore had the big touchdown catch. Hollywood Brown and Kyler Murray have not gotten on the same page. Hollywood Brown is having trouble separating, it seems. They're just a little clunky. Kyler Murray did underthrow him once, 1.5 times, I said yesterday. Hollywood Brown's not doing him a whole bunch of favors either, which is problematic. You saw Trey McBride come back and catch an underthrown ball to set up the game-winning field goal against Atlanta 2 weeks ago. It is utilized by quarterbacks to underthrow wide receivers, especially when they're going up against cornerbacks or safeties who have their head turned because they don't know where the ball's going. Hollywood Brown not doing Kyler Murray any favors. But by all accounts, it's still the 5th weakest position group that the Cardinals have in 2023, and the needs they're going to have moving forward, especially if they decide to part ways with Hollywood Brown, which I can't fathom they will. It'll come down to money. And just a quick, friendly reminder that Hollywood Brown shares an agent with Deebo Samuel, A.J. Brown, and Deebo Samuel, A.J. Brown, and DK Metcalf, all of whom got massive contract extensions. And Hollywood Brown is not at their level, okay, but he's going to want probably $18 million a year, and they're going to have to decide if he's going to be a wide receiver one for the future, if they're just going to cut ties. Now, if they cut ties, yes, that will strengthen the idea that if they draft top 3, if they are in reach for Marvin Harrison Jr., that would lend, a little bit more warmth from mind, at least for them to draft him, obviously. But where it sits now, I don't think they're going to move off from him. And there are 4 other positions that the Cardinals need more than wide receiver moving forward. I will discuss the other 4 as we roll on here on the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. Thanks for making Locked On Cardinals your first listen. This episode of Locked On Cardinals is brought to you by the Game Time app. I've used the Game Time app. I love the Game Time app. And there's a couple reasons why. One, super easy to use, super easy. It's very user-friendly. You can buy tickets up to like an hour after events start. Basketball, football, baseball when it comes back, hockey, concert tickets, comedy shows, theater, whatever it is. The Game Time app has you covered. And this is the coolest part, and this is what I use the majority of this live read every time to talk about. So say you're like, okay, I want to go to the Cardinals game on Sunday against the Rams. Let's look at the Game Time app. You put the promo code in that I'll tell you in a minute, and you're like, okay, these seats look good. You click on the seats. It gives you a panoramic view on your phone of what your vantage point will look like from those seats. You don't have to guess or be surprised when you get there. It's awesome. So download the Game Time app, create an account, use code LOCKEDONNFL for $20 off your first purchase. Terms do apply. Again, create an account and redeem code LOCKEDON NFL for $20 off. Download Game Time today. Last minute tickets, lowest price, guaranteed. This episode of Locked On Cardinals is also brought to you by BetterHelp. So, therapy is important. Okay. This time of year can be a lot, and it's natural to feel sad sometimes or anxiety about it, but adding something new and positive to your life can counteract some of those feelings. And therapy can be a bright spot amid all the stress and change, something to look forward to make you feel grounded and to give you the tools to manage everything going on. The holidays are definitely tough. And if you're thinking of starting therapy, give BetterHelp a try. It's entirely online, designed to be convenient, flexible, and suited to your schedule. You just fill out a brief questionnaire to get matched with a licensed therapist and switch therapists anytime for additional charge. Find your bright spot this season with BetterHelp. Visit BetterHelp.com/lockedon today to get 10% off your first month. That's BetterHelp, HELP.com/lockedon. Alex Clancy, Locked On Cardinals. Thank you for making Locked On Cardinals your first listen. Free and available wherever you get your podcast. And on YouTube, go to the YouTube channel, search Locked On Arizona Cardinals, hit the subscribe button, leave a like, turn notifications on. It helps me out a lot. And it helps me connect with more of you so I can build this podcast out to be exactly what you want, even if the things coming out of my big dumb face aren't exactly what you want to hear all the time. Locked On has launched the first ever national sports 24/7 streaming channel on YouTube. Locked On Sports Today is here for you 24/7, covering the top sports stories of the day with the local experts of Locked On, plus our national shows covering every league. Go to Locked On Sports Today on YouTube and subscribe to the first ever national 24/7 streaming channel. Wide receiver is the fifth biggest need for the Arizona Cardinals pertaining to roster structure and construction moving forward. And I know that it's like, well, the Cardinals need a lot of help. Yeah. And they need a lot of help elsewhere more. Number 4 is pass rush. Okay. So go with me here. Yes, BJ Ojulari's been better. Zaven Collins has shown flashes. Dante Stills has shown flashes, 6th-round pick from the interior. Lucky Fotu got a sack last week. He's hobbled now. But it's not an NFL pass rush. And the Cardinals, you need to have a good pass rush to be able to win games. You need to have a good front seven to be able to win games. The games are won in the trenches. That's what people say. And the Cardinals need help. And, there's a couple different ways you can look at this. The Cardinals will have 2 most likely top 20 picks. We'll see what happens with Houston. They have a pretty easy schedule down the stretch. We'll see what happens with rookie CJ Stroud, see if he can, withstand the rookie wall. Seems like he's flying right past it. There's some good edge rushers coming out of the draft. I mentioned in the draft, there is a very deep wide receiver draft. So it's pertaining to Marvin Harrison Jr. Yes, he could be, people call generational and transcendent. It's just rinse and repeat. Just look at his numbers against good teams he's played this year. Sure, blame the quarterback, whatever you want. Marvin Harrison Jr. has the potential to be great, yes. Crowning him right away without looking at alternatives is I think is a fool's errand. Pass rush help is expensive if you get it in free agency. If you can nail a pass rusher in the first round, that is what happens when good teams or bad teams pivot to becoming good/great teams. If you can hit on an edge rusher, if all these things, I know, and this is all circumstantial, but they need help in the pass rush. You need to have a good pass rush to win games. You do. Ask Patrick Mahomes how great your wide receiver room has to be to win. It doesn't have to be the best in the league. It doesn't have to be close to that. But you need a good pass rush to be able to get your defense off the field and your offense back on it. That's number 4 for me. Number 3 is the interior of the offensive line. Now, this is, and you can do / offensive line. We'll see what happens with DJ Humphries. The interior of the offensive line plus DJ Humphries have been the issues this year, namely the guards. Will Hernandez has been okay on the right side. Jalti Froholt has been good. And Paris Johnson Jr. has played every damn snap, and he's played as well as you'd expect a rookie to play on a 2-9 team, with Joshua Dobbs being quarterback for the majority of that. They need to bolster the offensive line. And this could be the left tackle out of Penn State, could be Joe Alt, it could be that. And they could bookend, and that would, solidify this need. But one of those, in my opinion, one of those 2 first-round picks needs to be an offensive lineman. And I see a lot of, they could get it in free agency. It is a very, very risky, high-wire act to pay an offensive lineman a whole boatload of money in free agency. We've seen it more cataclysmic than positive for teams who have done it recently. Now, I guess Cleveland is one of the exceptions to the rule there, but Nate Solder, Dwayne Brown, there have been some massive contracts. Trey Turner, there have been some massive offensive linemen that have gotten massive contracts that have sputtered. And if you can get a good offensive lineman in the draft, obviously it's always going to be cheaper to get somebody in the draft. But offensive line is a bigger need than pass rush and a bigger need than wide receiver. And this one is the least sexy of all of them. It's a defensive line, interior of the defensive line. They need to find somebody. And, with the Jalen Carter thing, obviously the legal stuff, I'm not touching that. Jalen Carter, the Cardinals needed an offensive line more than they needed a defensive tackle last year, just because you need to protect Kyler Murray. But now it's time. If they can get a good one, that's a massive need. Run stuffing, not allowing opposing centers and guards to deepen the pocket for quarterbacks. If you can blow up the interior of an opposing team's offensive line, that's their game plan. That blows up their entire game plan. And if you add a pass rush to that and good outside linebackers, that's what dreams are made of on defense. So while I'm talking about, the wide receiver group, yes, okay, I get it. Marvin Harrison Jr. can potentially be transcendent, but this may be the last Steve Keim needle in the side of the Arizona Cardinals, where they need so many other things because of how it's been set up the last 5 or 6 years, that it would be irresponsible for them to draft him when they have so many other needs. Look long-term and not just who the best wide receiver coming out of this draft is. There's going to be great receivers every year. It's like drafting a fantasy football. It's like drafting a quarterback in fantasy football in the first round. It doesn't make sense. Well, he's the best player. Yeah, but the gap between him and the next one, or him and the 8th one down, isn't big enough points-wise to warrant drafting him in the first round and not 8th. Listen, there's going to be so many good wide receivers in the first round, second round in 2024, that if the Cardinals can lock down the best offensive tackle or the best defensive lineman and the best corner with their second pick, it would bear more fruits for the Cardinals moving forward. And it wouldn't be as fun or as sexy, but it's more necessary. What is the number one need for the Arizona Cardinals moving forward? Yuck. I will discuss it as we roll on here. Locked On Cardinals, your team every day. This episode of Locked On Cardinals is brought to you by FanDuel. Okay. You better spring into action here, man. NFL season's halfway over. And FanDuel is America's #1 sportsbook. Right now, new customers get $150 in bonus bets with any winning $5 moneyline bet. That's $150 if your team wins. If you've been thinking about joining FanDuel, there's no better time to get in on the action. The app is super easy to use. There's a wide range of betting options, including spreads, player props, over-unders, and more. So visit FanDuel.com/lockedon and kick off the NFL season. FanDuel, official partner of the NFL. The Cardinals have needs everywhere. All of the wheres. You could probably say, aside from quarterback and safety, they have needs. But there are 5 that are most necessary as pertaining to positioning them with the strongest front moving forward. As they build this foundation, they need talent everywhere, and they need talent in these 5 positions the most. 5th, wide receiver. And you're looking at this on the curve of looking at how bad they need talent in these 4 positions higher than wide receiver. Pass rush. Pass rush is a premium necessity for teams to win football games. They need help. Interior of the offensive line / offensive line as a whole, whether it be left tackle or a guard or 2 that they can get in later rounds. We'll see what happens when John Gaines comes back. It was unfortunate. The interior offensive lineman, who was briefly in line to potentially start at center for the Cardinals before having a season-ending injury during camp. Interior of the offensive line / offensive line, because if you can't protect Kyler Murray, none of this is going to work. Interior can I speak, please, on a Tuesday on Locked On Cardinals? Interior of the defensive line. They need a run-stuffing stopper. They need somebody who can blow up any sort of game plan by blowing up the interior of the offensive line, not allowing the depth in pocket to be built, not allowing running backs to run roughshod. Interior defensive line, it's the least sexy, but it's the second most important. And the #1 most important need for the Arizona Cardinals, I think by a pretty wide margin, is cornerback. It's not Marco Wilson's fault. He's given up the most yards of any corner in the NFL this year by over 100 yards. Passer rating close to 150 when being targeted. He was never brought in to be a CB1. This is the greatest of the collateral damages for the 2023 season because of how they position themselves going into this season. Not spending a lot of money in the free agency, drafting Garrett Williams, even though they knew he was going to miss half the year because he got injured last year at Syracuse, and not adding any veteran free agents because they knew that they would need to spend money in 2024 on this position and in the draft. And Garrett Williams has played fine through his first handful of games. So you could see a CB1 in the making. Cornerback is probably the toughest position to play in football. Antonio Hamilton, ain't it. Starling Thomas, ain't it. Cotreau Clark would be playing if he was a better option than who they have on the field now. I don't think he's played since week 6, week 5, week 6. It's not Marco Wilson's fault. He was never meant to be the stud CB1 when Steve Keim traded up into the 4th round to draft him a couple years ago. He was supposed to be a complement, not shadowing the opposing team's wide receiver ones. And this is why we are witnessing the Arizona Cardinals having trouble down the field when Jalen Thompson and Budda Baker aren't involved. Cornerback 1 is by far the biggest need for the Cardinals. By far. And as you can see, as we wrap it up here, why I put wide receiver at 5. Edge rush, much bigger of a need. Offensive line, much bigger of a need. Defensive line, much bigger of a need. And corner, the biggest need in all of the land. They do have picks, and another one that bothers me when people say, oh, you can get that later in the draft. You know that usually the best talent is in the 1st and 2nd round, right? So drafting an offensive lineman in the 5th round is not directly the same as drafting one in the 2nd. Now, sure, you find gems everywhere. But players go in the 1st round for a reason. They go in the 1st round instead of the 6th round for a reason. Just drafting a player in a position of need doesn't mean that that player is going to be a player of impact. And let's be honest. I was going to say this in the beginning, but let's be honest. If the Cardinals have the 3rd pick or the 2nd pick, they ain't drafting there. Especially if they get the 2nd pick. I find it hard to believe that they're going to win less games than Chicago. They're going to be playing Chicago late in the year. We'll see how the Cardinals will go about that, because that could be a determining factor on if they get a ransom for the 2nd overall pick to trade back to keep this snowball moving downhill with getting future draft capital, or if they draft like 4th and miss out on trading back and Marvin Harrison Jr. But if they draft like what the Cardinals need, and I'm going to talk about this so much more, but we've got a couple minutes here. What the Cardinals need more than anything is another quarterback to really come out of the woodwork and have a 3-headed monster atop the 2024 draft, which gives them yet another position to be able to trade out of, because there's such a need for quarterbacks across the league. It's fluid. I wanted to explain myself as to why I think it'd be irresponsible for the Cardinals to draft Marvin Harrison Jr. when they have so many other needs that are more important than wide receiver at this point. It's important, but it's not the most important. And I know that you draft best possession, best player available and not need. Steve Keim put the Cardinals in this position. You need to eat your vegetables. The Cardinals haven't eaten their vegetables in 5, 7, 8 years. And it needs to start in 2024. Alex Clancy, Locked on Cardinals. I will talk to you tomorrow.